Hi, this is Steve with Thresher Media Group. Welcome to When You're Ready to Listen. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the truth about God, things you may not have understood, may not have been taught, or quite frankly, had a very hard time believing. And since our entire relationship with God rests on believing, it is important we learn how to separate the truth from the many lies and fictions that abound within the religion of Christianity. So when you're ready to listen, tune in and discover a pathway to freedom, encouragement, life, and hope. Episode 88, Revelation 11, verses 8 through 9. In our last podcast, the two witnesses had just been killed by the beast as a result of the war he wages with them. From Yahweh's perspective, this was an acceptable offering unto him, given by those who are willing to follow him wherever he goes, even to the sacrifice of their own lives. By the way, we will find out that they did not have to die. All they had to do was say that the beast is God and worship him. But being the called and chosen and faithful, their worship is for Yahweh and Yahweh alone. For context, let's retrace our steps a bit and let's read Revelation 11, verses 7 through 10. When they have finished their testimony, the beast that is now ascending up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. And their dead body in the street of the great city, which spiritually is now caused to be called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was caused to be crucified. Those from the peoples and tongues and nations will now look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days and will not now permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who are now dwelling on the earth will now rejoice over them and now be caused to celebrate. And they will send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who are now dwelling on the earth. Their body and the street. And their dead body in the street of the great city. Remember, the Spirit is always intentional and beyond precise. He says things exactly as he wants them to be expressed, and he wants us to understand them exactly as he expressed them. Therefore, it is important to note that despite how it is rendered in most translations, both body and street are singular and not plural. Their dead bodies, which would make sense, will not be in the streets of the great city. Specifically, their dead body in the street of the great city. This is strange, since immediately before this, in verse 7, we're told that the beast will make war with them, will overcome them, and will kill them, all of which is rendered in the plural. We'll circle back around to this, as its importance will make more sense as we understand what the Spirit means by the great city. The great city, and their dead body in the street of the great city, which spiritually is now caused to be called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was caused to be crucified. The key to understanding this passage is in deciphering elements of the code that gives us the secret location of the great city. There are 4 distinct clues to this cipher. Symbolically, this great city is mapped out for us using 3 key identifiers, providing for us a perfect identification of its location. Number 1, Sodom. Number 2, Egypt. And number 3, where their Lord was crucified. In addition, with the use of the present passive indicative, the 4th clue, he is telling us that where their Lord was crucified is even now called Sodom and Egypt. And that is a statement of fact. This 4th clue is critical to our understanding what the Spirit means by all of this. Oh, and keep in mind, 4 is a global number capturing the totality of God's creation from the north and the south and the east and the west. Fiction alert, fiction alert. There is this temptation for people to read this as if Sodom and Egypt are to be understood symbolically, figuratively, and where their Lord was caused to be crucified is to be taken literally. Then, prioritizing the literal, they tie this whole passage to the actual city of Jerusalem. With that conclusion, they then decide that this passage does not describe a global war against a community of Yahweh's witnesses, but a literal war against 2 individual witnesses, dismissing everything else the Spirit has made clear about those who are now worshiping in the sanctuary of God. There is an immediate problem with this fiction. The Spirit said that this great city is even now symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, which is identified as the place where their Lord was crucified. Or said another way, the place where their Lord was caused to be crucified is now called Sodom and Egypt. However, the Codex does not contain a single reference to Jerusalem being likened to Egypt. It is likened to Sodom, but it is never likened to Egypt. Even now, today, no one likens Jerusalem to Egypt. That creates a serious problem in identifying this great city as the literal city of Jerusalem. The apostate religious system. All we must do is examine the Codex, and we will discover that the great city is symbolism. It is a picture. This reference is used a total of 8 times in Revelation. In each of the passages, it refers to the apostate religious system, the apostate church that will be the tool used by the beast to wage war against the 2 witnesses. Some of the other identifying references of the great city are to Babylon, code for the apostate religious system, and to the woman who rides the beast, code for the spirit behind the religious systems of this world, upon which the beast rises to power. It is said that this great city reigns over the kings of the earth, over the spiritual rulers who are the power behind their earthly counterparts, and that many will mourn its destruction. It therefore should not surprise us that the bad angels, the kings of the earth, manifested themselves to humanity in the guise of religious figures to be worshipped and religious systems to be followed, for they are ruled over by this great city. After all, Dagon was the god of the Philistines. Ashtoreth was the goddess of the Sidonians. Chemosh was the god of Moab. Milcom was the god of the sons of Ammon. Baal was another god of the Moabites. Baal-zebub was the god of the Ekron. Succoth-Benoth was the god of Babylon. Negral was the god of Cuthath. Ashima was the god of Hamath. Nibaz and Tartak were the gods of the Avites. Adramelech and Anamelech were the gods of the people from Sepharvim. All gods to be worshipped. This still rings true today in the worship of Mary, the angels, Jesus even, the false ones, Allah, the gods of the East, as well as the worship of Satan. But let's be clear. There are no connections, symbolic or literal, between the great city and the literal city of Jerusalem. Sodom. First, regarding the great city, even now being called Sodom, we are given a picture of spiritual adultery or fornication. When we refuse to repent of the works of our hands, so as not to worship demons and the idols of gold and of silver and of brass and of stone and of wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk, we are not just idolatrous, but we are fornicating with another god. As God views it, we are committing adultery. We have made a Jesus in our own image, our golden cow, and worship him as Yahweh. In fact, whether we give ourselves to another god, a spirit, mankind, the government, a non-biblical system of thought or belief, or even the me, where we trust ourselves and our wisdom, we commit spiritual fornication. We see this described for us in the letter to Pergamum and in the letter to Thyatira, where their idolatry is directly referred to as sexual immorality. The people of the great city, the apostate church, are spiritually immoral, just as the people of Sodom were guilty of immorality. Egypt. Second, regarding this great city, even now being called Egypt, we need to look only to one of the most famous stories in all Jewish history to understand this picture. Egypt was the oppressor of God's people. What got God's attention was not just that Egypt enslaved his people, but while under their care, the Egyptians oppressed and tormented them. This is clear in Yahweh's first discourse with Moses. Yahweh said, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their sufferings." Oppression, affliction, and suffering are the key traits of this great city that is now being called Egypt. In like manner, all throughout the church age, the great city, apostate religion, those in the temple at large who are not permitted in the sanctuary, has been, is, and will continue to be the oppressors and agitators who bring affliction and oppression to the bondservants of Jesus Christ. As Jesus warned, they will make you outcasts from the synagogue, or church for that matter. But then he added, an hour is choosing to come for everyone who has been killing you to think that he is now offering service to God. These things they will do because they have not known the Father or me. By way of example, this was and is the experience of the two lampstands that were honored by Jesus, Smyrna and Philadelphia. Oppression, affliction, and sufferings will be tied to the 3.5 months of authority which those in the temple at large will have to subject the holy city, where their Lord was crucified. Third, regarding Sodom and Egypt being the place where their Lord was crucified, this is a spiritual reference to this apostate religion, the great city, that killed Jesus. In those days, this apostate religion was in the form of Judaism, which had long fallen from the true faith. Jesus even lamented about this when he rode into Jerusalem. He said in Matthew 23, verses 37 through 39, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who is now killing the prophets and now stoning those who are caused to be sending to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is now being left to you desolate. For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me until you say, he has been caused to being blessed, he who now chooses to be coming in the name of the Lord. In this passage, Jerusalem is a picture of the entire apostate religious system. Keep in mind, Jesus even called the religious leaders hypocrites, whitewashed tombs full of dead man's bones, and all uncleanness, and blind fools who lead the blind. He went on to say that since they saw him and hated him, that they also hated his father, and that their true father was the devil. Quite the indictment. Jesus was killed physically outside of Jerusalem, outside of the gate, outside of the camp. But he was killed spiritually in this great city of religious apostasy. And it was his very own people who had him crucified. The Romans, they merely carried out the desires of this apostate religion. They were just the tool. It was his own people who screamed, his blood shall be on us and our children, which would include their literal offspring and their spiritual offspring, namely the religion of Christianity. Any religious order, whether Protestant evangelical Christianity, Judaism, Catholicism, Islam, Hinduism, or any other religion, which will include the worship of the beast, which persecutes, oppresses, and kills God's anointed ones, is a player in the great city Babylon, which is a picture of apostate religion, which is ruled and dominated by the woman who rides the beast. Apostate religion is the great city where their Lord was crucified. With that said, we'll find out that there will be a great move towards syncretism, the blending of religious ideologies, and there will be one primary face of religion that comes from the realms of Christianity. And this force will be a unifying factor amongst all the world religions. This will be the platform on which the beast will rise to power from within the sanctuary led by the woman who rides the beast. It's a global war. The two witnesses are killed in the great city, which exists all throughout the world. This great city is filled with those who did not repent of the works of their hands, so as not to worship demons and the idols of gold and of silver and of brass and of stone and of wood, which can neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their immorality, nor of their thefts. These murderers are those who hold to an apostate religion, presumably having many faces but with one unifying core. Matthew 15, 7 through 9. You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. This is the religion of the beast, the false Messiah, for he teaches the precepts of men as doctrines of Yahweh. This apostate religion is known by its spiritual idolatry and fornication, Sodom, and its willingness to persecute and oppress true believers, Egypt. And at the direction of the beast, they will kill the true believers in the great city of apostate religion, where their Lord was crucified. Tragically, those murderers will believe they are serving the true Messiah. Their dead body and the street. And their dead body in the street of the great city. Let's circle back around to why the Spirit chose to utilize the singular when referencing the location of the dead. We know that there were two witnesses and that they are the bread of the presence in the sanctuary, the 144,000, a great multitude which no one could count from every nation and tribes and peoples and tongues, comprised of both Jews and Gentiles. These are those who are now worshiping in the sanctuary. They are those who have been measured off as the holy city, the bride of Christ. The holy city, comprised of those who are now believing, stands in contrast to the great city of those who once believed or who were convinced that they were believing. And even if after all we have studied, someone tries to still claim the two witnesses are two individuals, there is still a plurality, two dudes. Thus, there should be bodies, at least two. But the Spirit intentionally used the singular body, and this body is found in the street. The Spirit was making a very specific point. Body, the Jews and Gentiles. Jesus once declared, I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. This prophetic declaration was realized through what Jesus did on the cross. He made the Jew and Gentile into one flock with one shepherd. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 22 through 23. And he, the Father, put all things in subjection under his feet, that being Jesus, and gave him as head over all things to the church, which now is his body, the fullness of him who now chooses to be filling all in all, and who is caused to now be filling all in all. Ephesians 2, 14 through 16. For Christ himself now is our peace. He has been uniting Jews and Gentiles into one people, when in his own body on the cross, he has been breaking down the wall of hostility that separated us. He did this by ending the system of law with its commandments and regulations. He is now making peace between Jews and Gentiles, as he might make in himself one new people from the two groups together as one body. Christ might reconcile both groups to God by means of his death on the cross, and our hostility towards each other was being put to death. Viewing the situation from the heavenlies, the Spirit sees the 144,000, this great multitude that no one can count, as one body, one people, the true church collective, the bride of Christ, hence the use of the singular, their dead body. The street of the great city. The Greek word translated as street is plateia, and it literally means a wide plat of land, or even an open square, and not so much a street or road as we would think it to be. It is used in Matthew 7:13, also in the singular and not as a plural, where Jesus said that the gate is wide and the way is broad that is now leading to destruction, and there now are many who are now choosing to enter through it. This is the way, or the wide plat of land or open square. It is the gateway now leading to destruction, quite literally. The gateway to the one whose name is destruction, the beast. And all those who have taken up residence in the great city of religious apostasy have found this wide plat of land. And it is here that the two witnesses are slaughtered by the many who are now entering through this wide gate. It is happening now. Right when we thought we were covering ground that was exclusively tied to the end times, with the beast that is even now ascending out of the abyss, waging war against the two witnesses, and leaving the body of this one group on the wide plat of the great city of religious apostasy, the Spirit once again jerks us back into the present. Revelation 11:9. Those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will now look at their dead body for 3.5 days and will not now permit their dead body to be laid in a tomb. A look at the unburied. With the use of the present tense, the Spirit is communicating that the killing of God's bondservants is not something reserved exclusively for the end times, as his people have been sacrificed since the time of Christ, and people have looked at the dead. This is a terrible reality for far too many around the world, hence the souls under the altar crying out for a reckoning. Oh, by the way, both references to body in 11:9 are rendered in the singular and not plural. Dead body. The Spirit is consistent. But why pull us back into the present? The comment that they do not now permit their dead body to be laid in a tomb is quite odd. For some sick and strange reason, people rejoice when they kill Christians, and it's not uncommon to leave them unburied. For example, the Roman government would treat Christians the same way they would treat criminals. They would leave the crucified hanging as a warning to others to not follow in their practices. They would let their dead bodies hang and rot and be given over to the scavengers to be picked apart, ensuring complete annihilation of the martyrs. Christians were denied burial because the Romans believed that if they let their bodies decompose or be ravaged by the scavengers, there would be no hope for resurrection, believing that their souls could never rejoin with the body. This was also the idea behind having wild beasts eat them and tear them apart in the Roman arenas, or taking their dead bodies and ripping them apart and then burning the pieces. It was all meant to crush this stubborn religion that held to a resurrection ideal of which they would not relent, even in the face of intense persecution. For instance, in an account of history written by Eusebius, who is a famous Roman historian, there is a story of the martyrdom of Blandina. This woman was dragged by a net and trampled under by the feet of a bull. They left her body unburied, but closely guarded, for 6 days to demonstrate their disdain for Christianity and to ensure the requisite number of days had passed such that there would be no hope for the spirit to ever join to the body. It is also written in Tortures and Torments of Christian Martyrs that local citizens would come and lament over the torn and dismembered bodies of Christians and say, "Where is their God now? What has their religion profited them, which they prefer to their own lives?" It is interesting to note that their dead bodies were carefully watched and guarded. They did this so that no one would steal the body parts and then make a claim to resurrection. This is the same reason they guarded Jesus. And for centuries, in lands ruled by the Roman Catholic Church, the priests and bishops would refuse to bury the bodies of Protestants or even allow them a grave in the church grounds. There is a story in the Biblical Dictionary of Christian Missions that occurred in Madagascar in the 1800s. The new queen declared Christianity to be illegal, but one woman by the name of Rasalama refused to stop practicing her faith. As such, she was speared and left unburied. There are reports of similar things happening in India. Christians are murdered and just left unburied. This practice is a means to humiliate the other Christians in the village, to instill fear into their hearts, hoping to prevent them from continuing to practice their faith. The slaughter of Christians seems to have always been a spectacle, a sideshow for unbelievers inspired by the agents of darkness who are always, pathetically, trying to claim some measure of victory over Yahweh. So little do they know. With stories like these, we can understand why this passage is rendered in the present tense. The Spirit is clear in his communication, and if one is careful not to dismiss the code, but pay attention to these key shifts, the picture he is painting is evident. These events are and will continue to happen to the community of two witnesses, just as they have been happening throughout the time of day that has been allotted to those who dwell on the earth. It is likely that the Spirit wants to balance the scales, so to speak. After all, many read the Revelation narrative and are just so thankful that they do not have to live in those days with all those terrible things happening to believers. As such, it seems that those, quote, tribulation saints, as some like to call them, get the short end of the stick. To give us perspective, the Spirit pulls us back to the present in order to cause us to remember that some people around the world are experiencing this level of torment and persecution even now. Believers in Indonesia, China, Iran, North Korea, countries in Africa, more recently in Canada, and in various other places around the world that are extremely hostile to Christians. They have terrible lives, and they're always under the threat of imprisonment, torture, and death. Likewise, the hostility towards the chosen in the Western countries is ever increasing. Who is looking? The Spirit also makes the point that it is the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations who now look at the dead body. Thus, this sort of martyrdom and declaration is a global event that occurs in the great city of religious apostasy. Again, this is not an event that is tied to literal Jerusalem, as the modern fiction would tell us, and it is not an event or experience that is exclusively tied to the end times. In addition, the Spirit uses 4 descriptors: peoples, tribes, tongues, and nations, indicating by the code that this is a global occurrence, as the number 4 speaks of the entirety of God's creation from the north to the south to the east and to the west. It would have been far simpler just to say the peoples of the world. The Spirit, however, did not want us to miss the hidden message. The entire scene is alluded in the Codex in Psalm 79, verses 1 through 7. O God, the nations have come into your inheritance. They have defiled your holy temple. They have laid Jerusalem in ruins. They have given the bodies of your servants to the birds of the heavens for food, the flesh of your faithful to the beasts of the earth. They have poured out their blood like water all around Jerusalem, and there is no one to bury them. We have become a taunt to our neighbors, mocked and derided by those around us. How long, O Yahweh, will you be angry forever? Will your jealousy burn like fire? Pour out your anger on the nations that do not know you, and on the kingdoms that do not call upon your name, for they have devoured Jacob and have laid waste his habitation. This passage picks up not just the death of believers, but their being left unburied, but also the ushering in of the time of Yahweh's great wrath and punishment against the nations. It is very apocalyptic and speaks right to our narrative of how Yahweh's wrath and punishment will be poured out once his anointed ones are gathered together and meet him in the air and are no longer physically present upon the earth. 3.5 days. Once again, we come to the mysterious number of 3.5, but this time expressed in days. We have seen 3.5 years, 3.5 months, and now 3.5 days. Clearly, there is both a figurative and a literal meaning to the 3.5 days in which the peoples of the world even now stare at the dead bodies of Yahweh's 2 witnesses. Figurative 3.5 days. These people will now look at the dead body for 3.5 days and will now not permit their body to be laid in a tomb. Since this is all rendered in the present tense, we can understand that days is meant to be understood as a figurative concept, code for the time in the light when the gospel still shines the light of Jesus into the world, the time before the darkness of night. Accordingly, this image of the dead body addresses the martyrdom of Yahweh's bondservants, which has occurred every moment of now, from the time of Jesus right up to the time that will immediately precede the rapture. The reference to day also captures the fact that there will be some believers who are alive and remain until the rapture and are not slaughtered in the big sacrificial offering. I have included an illustration and would therefore encourage you to go to threshermediagroup.com and download the transcript. By the way, there's another time expression which the Spirit gives to these 2 epochs of 42 months or 3.5 years, and that is in generations. In Matthew 1:17, the Spirit informs us as follows. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. And from the deportation of Babylon to the Messiah, 14 generations. 3 sets of 14 are a perfect collection of generations, amounting to the same period of mystical 3.5 years expressed in 42 generations. 14 times 3 equals 42. And with the use of the present tense, we know that the phrase 3.5 days figuratively refers to the period of time that the perfect, 3, expression of grace, 5, the light of the witnesses, has been in the world. This will continue until the 2 lampstands are removed at the time of the rapture. Then the time of the day, the time of light, will be completed, and the time of darkness will consume those who even now are making their abode in this world. Literal 3.5 days. But at the same time, this 3.5 days has a literal application to the time at the very end of the 3.5 months of slaughter, where the body of the 2 witnesses will have been strewn all around the world in the street of religious apostasy, and people will rejoice and celebrate their apparent demise. By the way, the reference to day also captures the fact that there will be some believers who are alive and remain until the rapture and are not slaughtered in the big sacrificial offering. So even though many are dead, some light will still be shining until the rapture. Then comes darkness. These are the very last days of light that will shine on the earth. After that, there will be only darkness. Again, I've included another illustration, so I encourage you to print the transcript. The 3.5 days of impossibility. In the first century, the Jews would bury their dead as soon as possible. However, they believed that the spirit of a person hung around its corpse for 3 days. Thus, they would not declare a person to be legally dead, even though they were technically dead, until 3 days had passed. This is the tradition that underscores the story about the resurrection of Lazarus. Jesus heard that Lazarus, one of his closest and beloved of friends, was sick, yet he decided to stay where he was for a couple of extra days, which seemed strange to everyone. When he finally arrived at the home of Lazarus, he had already been in the tomb for 4 days, indicating to everyone that all hope of resuscitation was lost. His spirit was departed, and he was legally, morally, ethically, certifiably, and undeniably dead. Jesus had purposely waited until the 3 days had passed, knowing that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. He wanted it to be an unmistakable miracle, which no one could contest, as he demonstrated that he alone is the resurrection and the life. And sure enough, he called Lazarus out of the tomb, and he lived. This seems to be one of the messages behind the 3.5 days when the 2 witnesses are resurrected. Their life from the dead will be undeniable, unmistakable, unexplainable, and certifiably miraculous. It will be an impossibility. The Lord's anointed ones will live again, and all will see the undeniable and simply impossible miracle. To get a free download of the full written transcript with all the scripture references footnoted, please go to threshermediagroup.com. That is THRESHER mediagroup.com. This is Steve with Thresher Media Group. When you're ready to listen, tune in.